All right, today we're going to go ahead and talk about this idea of completing the square. All right, so remember we have been talking about the square root method where we go ahead and take the square root of a quadratic equation and we go ahead and solve it from there. The same idea is going to work for completing the square. So remember our standard form of an equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, okay? And we have solved these several different ways. We've solved them by factoring, we've solved it by square root method, and now we're going to go ahead and use something that's used with the square root method with this standard form. But first, before we do that, we want to talk about something called vertex form. Okay, and vertex form is in a different shape, so it looks like this: a x minus h squared plus k is equal to 0. And so remember when we graph this, we have a vertex in the form of hk. Right, and if we haven't graphed it yet, then don't worry, we're going to go ahead and do that later. The whole thing is you want this piece here to appear. Okay, that's what we're looking for when we're completing the square. Right? So we want to go ahead and get it in this format so we can go ahead and solve it. All right, so how we're going to start off with is we got to look at one thing. We need to look at our b. Okay, and the main part of this we got to start off with is we're going to go ahead, take our b, have it or divide it by 2, and then square that whole piece. So that's the idea of what we're going to do with this. So I'm going to go ahead and take a simple example. So I have, I'm going to do another page here, x squared minus 2x minus 5 is equal to 0. Okay. And I want to go ahead and do this by completing the square. So first I need to identify my b. My b is going to be equal to negative 2. The sign goes with it. All right? So I want to take that negative 2 and divide it by 2. I need to have it. Okay? And that's going to give me negative 1. And then I need to go ahead and square negative 1, which is going to give me a positive 1. All right? So I need to go ahead and work with this. All right? So I have my equation. And the first thing I want to go ahead and do is I want to take my 5 and I want to go ahead and move it to the other side. Okay? So these are going to cancel out. And my equation is now x squared minus 2x. I'm going to leave a big blank space is equal to 5. Okay? Now this one here is going to be added to both sides of the equation. So I have it both on the other side. What I have done is I have made this a perfect square trinomial. Okay. And the number I'm going to look at now is this negative 1 before I squared it. Okay. So in order to create this, if I were to go ahead and factor, okay, it would factor into x minus 1 times x minus 1, or x minus 1 squared. Okay, so this negative 1 is the same negative 1 that came from here. That's pretty cool. So whatever you get after you divide by 2 actually goes in your binomial. After you square it, that's what gets added to both sides. All right. So I have x minus 1 squared is equal to 6. Now I'm going to use my square root method that I've been using. And I'm going to head and take the square root of both sides. Okay. Now remember, when I use the square root method, those two are opposites and they cancel, which leaves me with just the x minus 1. You can leave it in parentheses or not, doesn't matter. Now 6 is not a perfect square, so equals plus or minus the square root of 6. Okay, because remember, 6, not a perfect square. Whenever we take the square root, we do have a plus and a minus version. Okay, so x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 6. I'm going to go ahead and add 1 to both sides. We're just going to cancel that out. So x is going to be equal 1 plus or minus the square root of 6. And that's all there is to it. Okay, 6 is not a perfect square, so I'm either going to add 1 to it or subtract, add the square root of 6 to 1, or subtract the square root of 6 from 1 to get my two answers. You can leave it in this format here as it is, or you can write them out separately as 1 plus square root of 6, 1 minus the square root of 6. Okay, so go ahead and try this, and I'll come back with another video in a little bit.